Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my blank Game Week 26 team selection. I am definitely going to be taking a hit this week, and in today's video we'll discuss which players I'm looking to bring in and just how big that hit will be. If you do enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button, and if you're new around here, make sure to subscribe as well. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, we're going to jump straight into my team selection for Game Week 26 today, wasting absolutely no time at all. I'm currently lining up in a 4-3-3, and the team is in an okay position. I have a bit of money in the bank. I have only the one free transfer, sadly, but I can field 11 players for a -4, assuming that all of my players get through the next few days unscathed before the deadline. So a -4 hit is almost guaranteed for me, and it's just if any other players are ruled out, or if I've got any doubts around certain players, that may push me towards a -8. So we're going to go through all of the players individually today, but obviously if a player has a fixture, that might be enough to just allow them to stay in my team for a little bit longer. For the goalkeepers, I have Areola and Kelleher. I sold Dubravka last week, and the reason for that is Areola covered me for blank Game Week 26 against Brentford, and then blank Game Week 29 against Aston Villa. And in and around that, Areola's fixtures are pretty good. He's one of the top scoring keepers in the game. And whilst West Ham have actually been the second worst defence in the league over the last 6, actually only behind Newcastle, that's sometimes not an awful thing for a goalkeeper, because it means at the very least, he's probably going to make a hell of a lot of saves. So I quite like Areola as a keeper still, and I think partnered up with Kelleher, that's fine. I may actually get Game Week 27 for Kelleher, because it sounds like Alisson will not be back until the end of March. So I'm pretty happy with my goalkeeper situation, but obviously moving forward after the blank game week, I'm probably going to look to bring in another keeper outside of Liverpool and West Ham. But Areola this week, absolutely fine for me. Moving on to the back four, it's actually not awful. The good thing about my team is I do have an Arsenal defender. Would I like to? And could I potentially look to bring in a second this week? Absolutely. I think Arsenal are comfortably the best defence in the league at the moment. Their expected goals conceded is ridiculous. It's something like 3 over the last 6. So they're conceding about a 0.5 XGC on average every single game. It's ridiculous data. And even if you watch the game, let's say you don't like expected data, which is absolutely fair enough. If you watch it, they're just not giving opposition teams the chance to get on the ball and create chances. It's like they give them absolutely nothing. And it's interesting because now alongside that, they're also starting to score goals as well, Arsenal. And if they compare those two together, they have a genuine chance for the title. Let me know down below, Arsenal fans, do you think you've potentially got a chance to win the Premier League this season? But the way they're defending, coupled with if they can keep scoring goals, it does look very good for them. I do think Gabriel is definitely the better defender out of Gabriel and Saliba. And if you don't already own Gabriel, he's definitely worth picking up this week. It does not matter if you're looking to free hit in 29 or not. I still think it's worth bringing him in, because over the next 3 games, you've got Newcastle, Sheffield United and Brentford. I actually think this is the probably worst fixture of the next 3 from a defensive perspective for Arsenal. I'm not necessarily expecting a clean sheet for Gabriel, but you could certainly see it. But I still think that Newcastle, despite their defensive woes, they are kind of still attacking fairly well. So I would still expect probably Newcastle to score, but beggars can't be choosers. I don't have many players this week, so Gabriel is absolutely fine. Pau Torres is the next one, and I actually think Pau Torres will be a very popular transfer in. And whilst it was frustrating because I actually bought him in Game Week 16 or 17 ahead of the blank week, and then he got injured in the week that I brought him in. And then he's just been sat there on my bench. We thought he might be back, and then he wasn't. And it has been very frustrating to own him. But the fact that I held him through that, and the fact that he's now back, I do think he's a really nice hold for me now, because again, he plays in 26 and in 29. He's got Forest in 26 and then West Ham in 29. So as someone like me that is looking to try and save the free hit in Game Week 29, Pau Torres is just an excellent option. The only slight concern around Pau Torres is, of course, he has just come back from injury. Could he re-aggravate his injury? Absolutely. But the other issue is that Aston Villa have a lot of injuries at the moment. The main one being Boubacar Kamara is now out, and it looks like it will be John McGinn that's playing that deeper role. And McGinn is a brilliant footballer and a brilliant player for Aston Villa, but I don't think he's a defensive midfielder, and he's certainly not going to do the same. He's not going to do the role to the same level, let's say, that Kamara would. So that is a slight worry for them. And obviously at the moment, they're pairing Pau and Longley, or it might be that Chambers comes in because Diego Carlos and Konsa are also injured. So whilst I'm happy to have Pau and he covers me for the fixtures that I need him, I don't think I'm particularly optimistic about the chances of clean sheets for Aston Villa at the moment. But you never know, and it is an okay fixture against Forest at home. We'll then move on to Nathan Ake. I actually brought in Nathan Ake last week as part of a -4 hit ahead of the double game week, but the Ake transfer wasn't the -4. I brought in Ake for Trent for free, and then I decided to take an extra hit to bring in Kelleher for my team. So the Ake transfer was free, and yes, it was very frustrating that he only started 1 in the double. If you compare him to Carl Walker, who picked up 12 points, Ake getting 2 points in the double was very frustrating. But I think he started 8 of the last 9 in the Premier League, which is absolutely brilliant. And I do think it was a rest rather than him being dropped, because I actually thought Ake was one of their best players against Chelsea. So I do expect Ake to come back into the 11. And whilst it was frustrating for him to miss the Brentford game, hopefully it means that he's got even more of a chance of starting this Bournemouth game. So I am cautiously optimistic that Ake will start, and therefore he's a very good option against Bournemouth. I don't think this will be a great game from a defensive perspective. I mean, those that are owning, maybe like me bringing in Solanke, are probably hopeful for goals there, but maybe he can get an attacking return if he does concede. And again, in a week like this, it's just nice to have players. So Ake will be absolutely fine, and I am expecting him, or at least hoping that he starts against Bournemouth. And then the fourth and final defender in my starting 11 is actually Charlie Taylor. I've never tracked a cheap defender's fitness as much as Charlie Taylor, but the reason we love Charlie Taylor is, number one, when we wanted to call on him earlier in the season, was it against Sheffield United? He got a 10-pointer. I mean, that is just remarkable. Calling on a defender from Burnley with absolutely zero attacking threat, and for them to deliver that, he's an absolute hero already. But the other reason is he plays in 26 and in blank game week 29. So if Charlie Taylor can stay fit and make sure that he's back in the starting 11, he is fantastic. Now, the only slight worry is he still hasn't started a Premier League game since coming back. And so there is the slight concern that maybe, not that he isn't first choice per se, but maybe he just needs to get his fitness up a little bit more before he can be back starting. But I'm hopeful in any regard that he'll get minutes. As long as he doesn't re-aggravate that injury again, I think he should get at least 1 point for us. That's famous last words, definitely. That's going to be clipped. But hopefully he'll get at least some minutes and have the chance to get clean sheet or an attacking return potentially. So that is my back four at the moment. It is one of the only times this season I've actually played a back four, and I wouldn't ideally play that back four, but you'll see in a second that I have some attackers that I'd rather not sell. The fifth defender for me is Pedro Porro. I'm recording this on Wednesday evening, and at the time of me recording this, I don't yet have an update on Pedro Porro's fitness. Even if he's ruled out for 4 months, I don't think I'll sell Porro this week, because I don't particularly want to play a 5 at the back, and I can field 11 players by selling some of my attackers instead. So even if Porro is ruled out, I can't see myself using a defensive transfer this week, especially because also there aren't many defenders that I really want to own. But that will create an issue for me moving forward, and I'll have to look at maybe replacing Porro in 27 or 28 ahead of the blank game week. So that is the defence at the moment. At least I have 4 defenders and a goalkeeper. Let's move on to the 3-man midfield. So looking at my midfield for Game Week 26, I actually only have 2 midfielders currently for Game Week 26, which is Saka and Foden, which means that I have Jota, Palmer and Richarlison all blanking. Very briefly on Saka and Foden, absolutely fine owning them for Game Week 26. Saka in particular, I genuinely am giving some consideration for captaincy, because Newcastle are the worst defence in the league at the moment. Saka is performing incredibly well. We know how much better he is at home as well. And there are some doubts around whether Erling Haaland is fully at it. I mean, he accumulated a lot of chances in Game 25, but he's certainly not got his shooting boots on quite at the moment anyway. So there is some consideration around Saka captaincy. I probably will default to Haaland, as we'll discuss in a second, but I do really like him for this week. I still think if you don't own Saka and you're looking to bring in a midfielder this week, he has to be number 1 priority. Because again, after Newcastle, it's Sheffield United and Brentford. Sheffield United, the best fixture in the league, arguably, along with probably Newcastle, and Brentford haven't been defending perfectly recently. So I do really like the idea of bringing in Saka if you don't currently own him. I'm also looking at bringing in another Arsenal midfielder myself, potentially as one of my options. And then on Phil Foden, I do think at some point he's going to be rested. That's not rotated, it's not dropped. I fully believe he is the first name on the team sheet, along with Erling Haaland in the attack. I think above Alvarez, Bernardo Silva, KDB, obviously, I think Foden is number 1. But he's just not going to start every single game. And I think at some point he will be rested. I've just got to cross my fingers that it's not this week, because I'm potentially looking at selling him in 27 or 28 anyway. So hopefully he'll start. If he doesn't start, hopefully we at least get some minutes for him. And I think there is a decent chance that if he doesn't start, he'll come off the bench for the likes of an Alvarez or Bernardo Silva. So we should get minutes regardless. I'm not trying to scaremonger here. I still think he should start this game, but there is always a chance, given how many games in a row he's been starting, that he does get the occasional rest. But I'm, like I said, just hopeful for this week he gets some minutes in some regard. I've then got Jota, Palmer, Richarlison. The player that I want to keep the most and will definitely not be selling is Richarlison. I do think that his minutes are clearly going to be a little bit lower now that everyone is fit and available, especially obviously Son and Werner. Both of them can play as the number 9, and then you can have the other one on the left. So there is a position, as we saw in Game Week 25, where Richarlison can come off around 60, 70 minutes, and Spurs still have enough attacking threat to create and score goals. So I do think Richarlison's minutes will be a little bit lower, but I still don't think that's going to be from the start. I don't think there'll be many, if any, games that he starts on the bench, but I do think there will be more games when he gets an early sub. And of course, that does make him a weaker option. But again, for someone like me that's trying to save their free hit in Game Week 29 and just try and get through that with free transfers, a player that has a fixture of Fulham away, even if he does get 60 minutes, is probably worth holding on to him. And I actually like the fixture next week against Crystal Palace at home as well. So Richarlison is the one midfielder out of the 3 that blank that I really don't want to sell. On Palmer, I don't necessarily want to keep Palmer. I'm not tied to Palmer. I'm not keeping him because I think he's a perfect asset to hold moving forward. The fixtures aren't great. He definitely blanks this week. He's got almost definitely going to blank in 29. Although, again, if Leeds beat Chelsea in the FA Cup 5th round, then Palmer will have a fixture in 29. So the fixtures aren't great considering 2 blanks in 4, probably. But what I like about Palmer is he's very, very cheap. So I can just tuck him on my bench anyway. I actually quite like the fixture next week against Brentford. And there is a chance before Game Week 27, we'll find out the results, of course, that he does have a fixture in 29. It's certainly more likely than the likes of Liverpool and City assets. So I kind of just want to hold Palmer one more week because I don't need to sell him this week. I've got some money tied up with him. Play him next week, worst case scenario. And again, if we find out before 27 that Chelsea and Arsenal is actually going ahead in Game Week 29, I'm going to be delighted that I held on to Palmer. Because after Game Week 29, he's then got Burnley in Game Week 30 as well. And then I'll probably be looking to wildcard in 31. So I kind of like the idea of holding on to Palmer at least for one more week and just assessing what happens ahead of blank Game Week 29. So Palmer's probably not going to be sold for me. I just don't see the necessity to because I can get 11 players out without selling Cole Palmer. So that therefore means if I'm going to make a midfield transfer, which of course I am, I should just note, by the way, you can field a 5-2-3 formation in FPL. So I could sell Pedro Porro and field 5-2-3. It's just not a great formation. And Jota's out long term. He blanks this week. So Jota will be sold for me. I'm actually going to leave the discussion around who I'm going to bring in for Jota until the next section when we take a look at my watch list because I'd like to have an in-depth discussion. I think I've narrowed it down to 3 possible replacements for Jota. 1 a little bit more expensive and then 2 cheaper options, but we'll discuss all of those. And yeah, I will definitely be making a transfer this week where I remove Jota. Unlikely to make another midfield transfer, but I wouldn't fully rule it out. So I'll be lining up probably with only 3 midfielders in 26, which does feel a bit crazy. Let's now move on to the 3 forwards. So moving on to the forwards, and I currently have 2 forwards along with my 2 midfielders. So actually only 4 attackers currently starting at the moment, which is pretty funny. So I have Watkins, Haaland, and then Darwin blanking. On Watkins, I do think he is the best forward to own in FPL at the moment, bar none really, ahead of even Erling Haaland. And I think especially that's the case if you're looking to try and save your free hit in 29. So again, if you're free hitting in 29, I still think Watkins is worth owning, by the way. But the real great thing about, again, Aston Villa assets in particular, but also Ollie Watkins, is that you're going to get him for both blank game weeks. And he's actually got okay fixtures between that as well. I think it's actually Luton next week. So good fixtures, plays in both blanks. And he's delivering FPL points and he's got the underlying data to go alongside it. There's very little to dislike about Watkins. There is no chance of me selling him until at the very earliest game week 31 or 32. But I may just keep him for the remainder of the season. He's delivering the points. Like, even if you ignore underlying data, which I know a lot of people do, that's absolutely fine. The points are there and the performances are there as well. And even with Aston Villa struggling slightly from a team perspective, Watkins continues to return. So I'm very, very happy to own him. Erling Haaland, like I said, his shooting boots weren't on in Game Week 25. Yes, it feels like we kind of wasted the triple captainship slightly, but I think the decision-making process was there. And would I make that decision again? 100 times out of 100. I genuinely thought it was the best time to play the chip. And Erling Haaland accumulated over 2.5 XG in Game Week 25. And he obviously only returned the once. So it's just one of those things in FPL. But it is a little bit worrying that since coming back, he's missed quite a few big chances. And maybe there is just something there that he's just a little bit rusty. But what I like is he's getting those chances. If Haaland wasn't getting any chances, that would worry, and maybe finished all of them, but wasn't getting many, I would actually prefer him to get loads and miss them, but that's kind of the way that I like FPL. I want my players to get loads of chances. Whether they finish them or not, I'm not really bothered, because I still feel like over time, if a player accumulates enough chances, they will start to finish them. And we've seen that with Darwin recently. He's been getting returns because he just gets so many chances to score. So I think especially with a player like Haaland, who we know is an exceptional finisher, no one is going to sit there and say Haaland's a bad finisher. If they do, you can prove it wrong again with data that he just overperforms and converts pretty much everything. I think once he's got a few games under his belt, he'll start to return to finishing more of his chances. So I'm perfectly fine having him. And I think I will just captain him because it's Haaland. He's still getting the chances. And he did take his goal against Brentford very well. I will just say, though, if you are wanting to risk it a little bit, I do really like captaincy on Saka. I don't really like it on Watkins because Forest have actually been okay defensively. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they've been okay, whereas Newcastle have been a shamble. So I do like the idea of a Saka captain. But for me, I'll probably just default to Haaland. And that then leaves Darwin in my team. I'm actually recording this just before the Liverpool game, by the way, but the leaks coming out today is that Darwin is not in the squad and is a doubt for the final, but it doesn't really matter anyway. If Darwin and Jota were fit, I was selling them. If they're out for 6 months, I'd still be selling them. So it just doesn't affect my team what's going on with Jota and Darwin. So Darwin will be sold for me, along with Jota. It's a lot more simple for me, though, in that Darwin spot. I don't need to discuss tons of options because it's going to be Dominic Solanke unless he picks up an injury over the next couple of days. The reason I'm bringing in Dominic Solanke is because I know for a fact in game week 28, I'm going to want to own Solanke against Burnley at home. Luton at home and Sheffield United at home. And then in game week 27, the week before, he's got Burnley away. So in the space of 2 game weeks, he's got the 3 best fixtures in the league, arguably, against Burnley, Sheffield United and Luton. So I really want him for those 2. And obviously, we're in game week 26 right now. So I know for a fact one of my 3 spots in my forwards has to be Solanke at the very latest 28, but preferably 27. I'm not going to sell Watkins, definitely, at any point up in the lead up to 29 to bring in Solanke. So that's one spot that I can't bring Solanke in for. And with Erling Haaland, I'm definitely not selling him in 27. There is a chance I could sell him in 28, but I'd ideally like to keep him for that fixture. And then if I do sell him, it probably wouldn't be until 29, which would probably be for Ivan Toney in the blank game week. So I'm not going to sell Watkins and I'm not going to sell Haaland, ideally anyway, which leaves only one spot left for Solanke, which is the spot that is currently occupied by Darwin. So I've got 2 options. I just bring in Solanke this week against Manchester City, which, yes, is a tricky fixture, and I know he clashes with Ake, so I'm probably not going to get points for both there, but I think it's good to just view them in separation, right? Ake is one player, Solanke is another, and I think he's good to bring in. But let's say, yeah, we probably don't expect him to do particularly well this week, so the other option we have is going for another forward, and then just moving to Solanke in 27 or 28. So I could bring in Højlund this week for 1 week against Fulham at home and then move to Solanke in 27, but that just feels like an extra transfer for not that much upside. Or I could move for Ivan Toney now, maybe plan to hold Toney through, and then maybe I would have to bring in Solanke for Haaland in 28, but then I'm losing the Burnley fixture for Solanke in 27. So I just don't think it makes a lot of sense to bring someone else, such as a Højlund or a Toney, into that Darwin spot when I know I'm going to want Solanke from 27. So pretty much confirmed for me, about 99.5% sure, that Darwin to Solanke will be my first transfer. And then, as I said, Jota to a number of possible midfielders will be my second transfer for a -4 hit. Assuming all goes well, that will give me 11 players for Game Week 26. They're not great players, all of them. And this is a point that I want to drive home to you. If you have 9 players, but they are a good 9, that is absolutely fine. You don't have to have 11. Let's say you own basically the same players as me, minus Charlie Taylor and Ake. So you're going to get 9 players for a -4 hit with all of the same attackers, plus Areola, Powell, and Gabriel. Yes, you've got 9, but are we really expecting Ake and Taylor to get that many points this week? They might get like 2 points each, probably, right? I'm not really expecting much more from them. So yes, you've got 9, but I wouldn't focus on the number. Like, getting to 11 isn't the important thing. It's making sure that the bulk of your squad are good players. As long as the 8 or 9 that you have, you are happy with, I think that's absolutely fine. If the 8 or 9 you have include the likes of Charlie Taylor, then that's probably not ideal. So I wouldn't stress too much about getting to 11. I would stress more so about getting good players that you want this week that you can also hold through future weeks as well. I will just quickly comment on Game Week 29 whilst you can see my entire team. My current chip strategy is to wildcard after Game Week 29 and also not free hit until later in the season as well. So my current strategy is something roughly like wildcard 31, free hit 34, bench boost 37. We'll discuss in future weeks around 34 and 37 and which week I prefer to free hit and bench boost. But the idea is to get through the next 4 game weeks without a free hit or a wildcard. The reason for that, and I want to drive home why it is so team dependent, is I've already got quite a few players for game week 29. Areola, Powell, Taylor, Watkins, Richarlison, Porro. Already, with 1 free transfer for this week, of course, I'm at 6 players for game week 29. And that's just the confirmed fixtures. We could get some cup upsets, and that could go even higher. But let's say all of the favourites go through, and we get the expected blanks that we're projecting to happen. I'm going to have 6 confirmed players for 29. Assuming no injuries. If I bring in another one this week, it's 7, and I'm going to have a few free transfers over the coming weeks to bring in the likes of Heung-min Son and Tony. So, for me, it just makes no sense to free hit in 29. Why would I free hit in 29 when I'm already relatively close to getting a team there? But if in your position, you're sat there, you've sold Richarlison and Porro, you don't have your Pau Torres, and your 3 players like Areola, Taylor, Watkins, then yeah, you're probably in a position where you say, you know what, I'm just going to commit to free hit in 29 and just use my transfers in other game weeks or for other game weeks. And I think you're fine doing that. I don't think free hit 29 is inherently good or bad as a strategy. I think it really depends on your team. But I'm pretty sure, unless there are some major cup upsets that really change my plans, I'm pretty sure I'm going to try and get through 29 without the free hit. So that's the current team. Let's now take a look at my watch list and in particular discuss my likely replacement for Diogo Jota. So guys, here is my watch list for Game Week 26. I've tried to narrow it down as much as possible. Very briefly, if I need to make a defender transfer this week, which isn't the current plan, by the way, but if I'm forced into it due to an injury, it would be either Reguilon coming in because he plays in blank Game Week 29 and he's had some decent attacking threat recently because he's on some set pieces for Brentford. So I like Reguilon, and if it's not Reguilon, it would probably be Saliba, who I'm probably leaning slightly towards at the moment if I were to make a defender transfer, simply because, yes, he probably blanks in 29, but I'm seeing 2 clean sheets in the next 3 games for Arsenal, and therefore he probably even outscores Reguilon, even with having 1 less fixture. So it'd be one of those 2 if I make a defender transfer. And on the forwards, as I said, I'm almost certain it's going to be Solanke. But let's say we get some sort of news that Solanke's not playing this weekend for whatever reason. It would either be Tony or Højlund. And I would probably lean towards Ivan Toney, just given the fact that he has a confirmed fixture in Game Week 29 again. So Tony would be the backup for Solanke if I don't bring him in this week, and if I make a defender transfer, Reguilon or Saliba. But the real focus for me, the key decision that I need to make this week, is around that replacement for Diogo Jota. I think that's the situation for a lot of people this week. If you want my in-depth discussion and a look at the stats in detail around the key midfielders for replacing Jota, I did that in a lot of detail in the Game Week preview video, which went live yesterday. So on my channel, just go to the most recent video, Game Week preview, and I talk about all of the players. So players that aren't here, Douglas Luiz, Kudus, Bowen, they're not bad, but all 3 of them have got really poor attacking data either across the season or recently. Bowen's is actually good across the season, but it's pretty poor recently. And Kudus and Douglas Luiz, I just can't consider them. I know you can talk about eye test, you can talk about penalties for Douglas Luiz. The data is just so bad for the 2 of them that I just can't bring myself, as the sort of manager that I am, which is fairly analytical, to bring them in. So I've narrowed it down to 4 midfielders. Garnacho is in there, but he's comfortably in 4th for me at the moment. The only reason I would really want to go there is if I feel like there is going to be a need very soon for me to use all of the money in my squad, because he is obviously the cheapest of the 4, or let's say I just get a really good feeling about him over the next couple of days, but more likely than not, it will be one of the other 3. So Garnacho is definitely solidly in 4th at the moment. The 3 players that I've narrowed it down to really are Ødegaard, Bailey, and Hwang. 3 different players for 3 different teams, offering 3 very different things, by the way. And they could all potentially come in for me. Ødegaard is playing incredibly well at the moment. His data is much, much better. He's passing the eye test. And Arsenal seem to have tweaked a few things in the attack, which is causing them to score a hell of a lot of goals. So I like the idea of bringing Ødegaard because the next 3 fixtures, Newcastle, so bad defensively. Sheffield United, so bad defensively. And everyone pretty much has Bukayo Saka now. So I kind of want a piece of that Arsenal attacking pie outside of Bukayo Saka. And Ødegaard is a player that I think not a lot of people will move to. A lot of people will see the fixture for Wolves this week and go, I want Hwang or Neto. Or potentially they might say, by the way, Neto's another player that you could potentially consider. Or if they don't want to go for Hwang or Neto, they might look at it and say, do you know what? Because I'm not free hitting in 29, I'll bring in an Aston Villa midfielder instead. I've just not seen many people look at Ødegaard this week, and I am kind of tempted. He is still probably in 3rd for me at the moment, in most likely players to come in for Diogo Jota, which means that my top 2 is between Bailey and Hwang. Hwang and Neto are obviously brilliant because they have 3 very good fixtures coming up, and this week they have Sheffield United at home. In a week where our teams don't look perfect on paper, it's nice to own a player with an absolutely plum fixture. And that's what they have this week. And like I said, the fixtures beyond that are pretty good as well. So there's a lot to like about Hwang. And, of course, Neto. The reason I'm leaning towards Hwang is the fact that we think he could be on penalties. But as I tweeted about and spoke about in yesterday's video, Sarabia has scored 17 club penalties out of 17. So he's taken 17 pens in his career for his clubs, and he scored all 17 of them. He did miss one in the World Cup against Morocco, which a lot of people pointed out. But outside of that, he's got a very good penalty record. And he obviously took that penalty because he is a good penalty taker. So Sarabia could be on pens. Hwang's penalty earlier in the season, Sarabia wasn't actually on the pitch. So people would say, well, Hwang took one earlier. Sarabia wasn't on the pitch, so maybe Sarabia would have taken that. And then when Hwang was at the Asian Cup, I know Hwang took one at the Asian Cup, but then whilst he was there, Sarabia took one for Wolves and scored it. So it's very difficult to actually work out who's on pens for Wolves. And if you told me Hwang wasn't on pens, I don't know that I'd bring him in. It is really the pens that swing in it. And his data's good outside of penalties, and he's got good fixtures, and I still think he's got good attacking threat. But given that he doesn't have a confirmed fixture in 29, and I want to build towards that, and given the fact that he's just come back from injury, the real selling point for me is the penalties. I love bringing in a penalty taker. So there are some slight doubts around that for me, but sadly, we're just not going to know that. Unless, for some reason, Gary O'Neill gets asked in the press conference. We just won't know that before the deadline. The player that I am actually slightly... and it's like 51% at the moment leaning towards, is probably Leon Bailey. Now, there's a lot that I don't like about Bailey. Injury prone, not on set pieces, not on penalties, and on top of that, his minutes aren't secure. He has actually started, I think, 10 of the last 12 games, so he will start more games than not. And I think over the next 4 weeks or 5 weeks that I'll need him, I could see him starting all of those. But he's only actually played 90 minutes once this season, Leon Bailey. So he's not going to get you significant minutes. Hwang and Neto and Ødegaard and even Garnacho to some extent, their minutes are going to be better than Bailey. So whilst his underlying data is promising, and I think he has a very high ceiling, and he should play in 29, assuming he starts that game or gets some minutes, the minutes are the concern with him. And I always preach about bringing in nailed players and bringing in players that are actually going to play 90 minutes on a consistent basis and bringing in penalty takers and bringing in players on set pieces, and he doesn't have any of that. So whilst it's very exciting as a pick and he does serve me in the fixtures that I need, bringing in a player with low expected minutes, or at least lower than some others, and not being on pens or set pieces, it just doesn't feel like a very FPL Raptor transfer. So I'm a little bit unsure on Bailey, but I am still genuinely, if you were to force me right now to make the move, I think I just want to really commit to having a strong team in 29 without the free hit. And also, over the next few weeks, his fixtures are good as well. So I still see him scoring goals outside of course, Game Week 29. For me, it will be between Bailey, Hwang and Ødegaard. Unless I make a complete U-turn on my decision-making over the next couple of days, it will be one of those 3 players. I would love to know down below in the comments, thinking about my plan and my strategy, would you bring in, let's put Garnacho in there as well. So Garnacho, Ødegaard, Bailey or Hwang. Again, I do like Neto. I'm not a massive fan of Douglas Luiz, Bowen or Kudus, but you can go for them by all means. So guys, for this final section, we're jumping over to Fantasy Football Hub to take a look at what my plan is for the next few weeks with transfers and how I am building towards that blank Game Week 29, which we've been speaking about a hell of a lot here on this channel, so I do apologise. If you don't want to get access to any of the stuff that I use over at Hub, by the way, there is a link in the description for a 7-day free trial and 30% off if you want to sign up as well. I use it exclusively for all of my planning, all of my stats, all of the player comparisons, projected points, etc. So do check it out if you want. There is a link down below. Their AI recommended transfer for this week is actually Darwin to Solanke. So they only recommend the one transfer. They recommend not taking a hit for me this week at least. And Darwin to Solanke, as you can see by the graph, over the coming weeks, given the fact that Darwin is a doubt, but also the fixtures, they think that Solanke will comfortably outscore him. And I would back that, and it is nice to have that confirmation bias. So if we do jump over to my team, I've locked in the 2 transfers of Bailey and Solanke in for Jota and Darwin for a -4. Again, I am subject to changing my mind, which I do very, very often on the deadline stream. It will be one of the 4 players that I've mentioned. I'm almost sure of it. And it could well be that I just go for a Wolves mid and just chase the upside this week. But at the moment, I am ever so slightly leaning towards bringing in Leon Bailey. Sorry, guys, random cut there. There was a very loud siren outside, so I had to stop the recording there. So this is the team for Game Week 26. 7.1 million in the bank that would give me to bring in Bailey and someone at that price point and Solanke. So going ahead to 27, this is roughly what the team would look like. I do have a bit of a benching headache, but there are a few things to think about. The first being, is Pedro Porro going to be available for 27? If he's not, it's not the end of the world. I have Ake against Manchester United or Charlie Taylor against Bournemouth, but it would be Ake coming in. And I wouldn't be overly surprised if they did keep a clean sheet, Man City. So actually, Fantasy Football Hub have him as having higher projected points anyway. So Ake coming in would be absolutely fine for me. And the team is actually looking pretty good here. I also have the option, by the way, because Alisson's unlikely to be back then, to actually play Kelleher against Nottingham Forest away. So the team's looking good for Game Week 27. I don't need to make a transfer desperately here, but I am sort of semi-eyeing up looking at something like Foden to Son. The reason for that is I know I'm going to want Son for Game Week 29 anyway against Fulham away. He's got Crystal Palace at home in 27, and I think that would upgrade my team bringing him in. The only issue, again, is I'm already benching at the moment Foden, and if it's not Foden, I can't bench Richarlison, Saka, Haaland, or Solanke, or Watkins, if I said that already. It's going to be basically Bailey, Palmer, or Foden. Maybe it is Bailey, because his minutes are the least secure. Luton aren't bad at home. Maybe I do bench Bailey that week, but you can see if I bring in Son for Foden, I then am forced to bench one of Palmer and Bailey. So we'll discuss the benching headache in the future. Let's say, do you know what? Because I kind of just want to do it. Maybe I do just bring in Son in Game Week 27 for Foden. Let's make that transfer. And let's say I do just decide to bench Bailey because he's the most likely to be rotated out of any of my players. Going into Game Week 28, if I just click Optimize Team for this week, the team is looking fine, but bear in mind this is the double game week for Bournemouth and for Luton as well. Now, by Game Week 27, we're going to find out who plays in 29, but Bournemouth are projected to not play in 29, which makes it very tricky to bring in too many of their players. And then we also have Luton, who are likely to play in 29. So I do think bringing in Luton players will serve me better for 29, but I don't want to miss out on the double for Bournemouth. I actually have a couple of possibilities here. I'm obviously already going to have Solanke in my team at this stage. I could bring in a midfielder, potentially, for either Palmer or for Saka. I'm not going to sell Son, Richarlison, or Bailey if I bring in Bailey because they have a fixture in Game Week 29. But then I'm less keen on taking out Saka and Palmer until I really need to, especially given their pretty good fixtures in the week. Then I could bring in a defender, but again, I'm not selling Powell, I'm not selling Porro, assuming he is available. I wouldn't sell Taylor, so it would be Ake or Gabriel, and then I could bring in a goalkeeper. So currently, the rough plan is actually Ake to Doughty, because I think he's got the attacking threat, and if he plays in 29, even better. So Doughty would come in, and I'm actually looking at Neto, but not Wolves Neto, Bournemouth Neto, and actually doing that for Kelleher. So something like this, because what that gives me is 2 Bournemouth, 1 Luton, but it doesn't give me an extra player that blanks in 29 because I can obviously still play Areola in that week. So if I just make those transfers, I know this is getting a little bit confusing and stuff, but it's good to plan ahead. It never works out the way that you hope it will, but it is good to plan ahead. If I now optimize the team, again, for this week, I would have Neto, Doughty, and Solanke doubling, and the players outside of that are pretty good. I could play either Porro or Taylor ahead of Pau Torres if I want to. I can decide that in the week, or I could make another transfer to bring in Senesi for a -4. But again, I'm not going to remove any of my players that play in 29. So it would be, do I think Senesi coming in for a -4 will outscore Gabriel? Do I want to sell Gabriel for Senesi or Senesi? Probably not. So that would be for another -4 in Game Week 28. So going into Game Week 29, let's count how many players I would have before making any transfers in 29. I actually don't know the answer to this. I probably should. So we would have Areola, Doughty, Taylor, Son, Richarlison. I'll just scroll down so you can see. Watkins, Bailey, Porro, Powell. So we're looking at 9 players for Game Week 29 with 1 free transfer. So for a -4 hit, I could field 11. I would be looking at something like, let me actually just quickly... Obviously, they don't have the blanks confirmed for 29, so we can't do that on a hub right now. But if I bring in, it would be Porro for Gabriel, and then it would be Pau for Palmer, and then Bailey for Saka. So the players that are blanking in my starting 11 are Haaland and Solanke at the moment. I would probably look at doing something like Solanke to Tony, and then it would be probably someone in for Saka or Palmer. I would probably be looking, maybe if a Brentford midfielder pops up at that time, they could be a decent shout. I've obviously already got 3 from Aston Villa. You could be looking at Kudus or Bowen at this stage if you wanted to. Or if there is another upset at that time in the FA Cup that gives us more fixtures in 29, then we could bring in that midfielder. It doesn't really matter the specifics at this stage. But what we would essentially be looking at, if I just make those transfers very briefly, is we would be looking at a -4 transfer in 26 to field 11, 1 transfer in 27 for free, a -4 transfer to get 3 doublers in 28, and then 1 further -4 transfer to get 11 players in Game Week 29. So it's 3 hits over the next 4 weeks, but I am saving my free hit, I'm saving my wild card, and when I look at this team for Game Week 29, I would love to know down below in the comments, by the way. Imagine that Haaland is just someone better. I have another 11th player. How far off is my team of a free hit? There are going to be some players that a free hit draft will definitely have that I don't. But assuming the fixtures go ahead in the way that we think, I've got Tony, I've got Son, I've got Richarlison, Porro, I've got my triple Aston Villa as well. My team's really not that far off of where it needs to be for 29, even if I were to free hit. So I am really leaning towards this strategy. I just need to decide. Like I said, Bailey gets me one transfer closer, assuming that Wolves do blank in 29. But I do think that Hwang has the upside in the immediate game weeks, and also so does Erdegaard. So I'd love to know down below in the comments again, now that you've seen my plan and my current transfers, do you think Bailey, Erdegaard, or Hwang makes the most sense for me? And who are you bringing into your team for Game Week 29? 26. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 26 team selection video with a bit of a look forward as well about how I plan on saving my chips for the later part of the season. If you did enjoy today's video, please do smash that like button. And if you are new around here, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel as well. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.